Admiral Sithril stood before the massive viewing screen and watched her world die. The fortress planet of Athon 7 burned below, its great defensive towers crumbling like sandcastles against the tide. Ships fled in every direction, their distress signals filling every channel with screams and prayers. 17 hours. The planet that was supposed to hold for 50 years had fallen in 17 hours. She pressed her four-fingered hand against the cold glass and felt something she had never experienced in 300 years of service. She felt defeat, not the temporary setback of a lost battle, but the deep, bone-cold certainty that this war was already over. They simply had not accepted it yet. Behind her, the command deck of the Valorian flagship hummed with desperate activity. Officers shouted orders. Screens flashed with casualty reports. Somewhere in the chaos, someone was crying. The Valorian Confederacy, 6 peaceful species united under one banner, was watching its future slip away. The enemy had changed. For 3 centuries, the Korath Dominion had been a threat they could manage. The Korath were brutal, yes. Aggressive, certainly. But they were also predictable. They attacked fortified positions with overwhelming force, and the Confederacy had learned to build walls they could not breach. But the new Korath were different. Their shock troops had been bioengineered for war, grown in vats, and trained from birth for nothing but killing. They moved faster, hit harder, and felt no fear. Worse still, their commanders had developed psionic abilities that let them see into the minds of their enemies. They knew every plan before it was executed. They anticipated every trap before it was sprung. The old strategies meant nothing now. The great walls were falling. Sithril turned from the window and walked to the central command table. Holographic maps showed the Confederacy's territory in blue, shrinking before her eyes as red markers advanced from every direction. Military projections scrolled across the bottom of the display, and she did not need to read them to know what they said. 18 months. Perhaps less. Then the Confederacy would cease to exist, and 6 species would become slaves to the Korath Dominion. High Counselor Yethvin appeared on the communications screen, his ancient face heavy with exhaustion. The leader of the Valorian people looked like he had aged 20 years in a single week. His golden eyes, once bright with wisdom, now held only fear. "Admiral," he said quietly, "the Council has made a decision." Sithril straightened her spine. Whatever came next, she would face it with dignity. She was Valorian. Her people did not break. "We are authorizing contact with the humans." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at the screen, certain she had misheard. Around her, the command deck fell silent. Every officer stopped what they were doing and turned to look. "Counselor," she said carefully, "that option was rejected 200 years ago. The humans were deemed too dangerous, too violent. We agreed that inviting them into galactic civilization would be like inviting a predator into our homes." "I remember the decision well," Yethvin replied. "I helped make it. I watched the observation reports. I saw what humans did to each other in their wars. I saw their capacity for cruelty, their endless hunger for conflict." He paused and seemed to shrink before her eyes. "I was afraid of them. I still am. But I am more afraid of what happens if we do not ask for their help." Sithril thought about the burning planet below. She thought about the refugee ships and the casualty reports and the red markers advancing across the map. She thought about her own children, safe for now on the homeworld, but not safe for long. "I will arrange the diplomatic mission myself," she said. Ambassador Kethra was chosen for the task because she was the bravest diplomat the Confederacy had. She had negotiated with hostile species, walked into active war zones, and once talked a planetary governor out of starting a nuclear war. Nothing in her long career had frightened her. Until now, her ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, and she felt her hearts beating faster as the blue planet came into view. Earth, home of the humans, the most dangerous species the Confederacy had ever observed. For 200 years, Valorian scientists had watched humanity from hidden observation posts. They had studied human history and human warfare and human nature. What they found had terrified them. Humans were predators who had never stopped being predators. They hunted each other across continents. They developed weapons of mass destruction and used them against their own kind. They created philosophies of hate and built empires on suffering. They fought wars over religion, over resources, over nothing more than pride and anger. and yet they also created art of stunning beauty. They wrote poetry about love and composed music that could make a Valorian weep. They sacrificed themselves for strangers and built communities in the ruins of their wars. They were capable of both the greatest cruelty and the greatest kindness that the galaxy had ever seen. They were chaos made flesh. They were unpredictable. They were terrifying. Kethra's ship was met by a human escort within minutes of entering the system. The human vessels were ugly things, all sharp angles and exposed weapons, but they moved with a speed and precision that impressed her despite her fear. The humans guided her to a space station orbiting their moon and invited her aboard with polite efficiency. The human leaders were waiting for her in a large conference room. Military officers in crisp uniforms, political representatives with calculating eyes. They watched her with a curiosity that she found deeply unsettling. She was not used to being the one who felt small. She presented her case simply. The Valorian Confederacy was dying. The Korath Dominion was destroying them. They needed help, and they were willing to pay any price to get it. The humans listened without interrupting. When she finished, they asked questions. Good questions. Sharp questions. They wanted to know about the Korath's numbers, their technology, their tactics. They wanted to know about the Confederacy's resources, its industrial capacity, its strategic goals. Kethra had prepared for months of negotiations. She had expected suspicion, demands, political games. She had been ready to beg. The humans conferred among themselves for less than an hour. Then a general with gray hair and cold eyes leaned forward and said 4 words that changed everything. "We will help you." Kethra blinked. "You agree, just like that?" The general smiled, and there was something in that smile that made her want to run. "You have an enemy that needs killing. We are very good at killing enemies. The details can be worked out later." 6 hours after arriving at Earth, Kethra departed with a signed alliance treaty. The humans were coming. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt the quiet terror of someone who has invited wolves into their home and prays they do not get hungry. The Terran Expeditionary Force arrived at the Myreth sector 3 weeks after the alliance was signed. Every Valorian commander had expected months of preparation. They had assumed the humans would need time to mobilize, time to train, time to understand the enemy they were fighting. They were wrong. Admiral Sithril stood on the observation deck of her flagship and watched the human fleet emerge from hyperspace. The ships were nothing like Valorian vessels. Where Valorian design favored smooth curves and elegant lines, human ships were blocky, angular, and covered in weapons. They looked like they had been built by creatures who expected to fight the moment they arrived anywhere. 4 full combat divisions, 50,000 soldiers, hundreds of warships. The humans had not sent a token force to show solidarity. They had sent an army. The lead ship requested permission to dock, and within an hour, Admiral Sithril found herself face to face with General Marcus Cole. The human commander was tall and lean, with gray hair cut short and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. He walked like a predator, smooth and confident, and the soldiers who followed him moved with the same quiet danger. Sithril led them to the Strategic Command Center, where the Confederacy's best military minds had gathered to brief their new allies. Holographic maps filled the room with blue and red markers. Casualty projections scrolled across screens. The situation looked grim, but the Valorian officers had prepared a comprehensive defensive strategy. General Cole listened politely as they explained the plan. The Confederacy would consolidate its forces behind fortified lines. They would build new defensive positions in depth. They would make the Korath pay for every system they tried to take, grinding down their forces through attrition until the enemy exhausted itself. It was a sensible plan. It was a careful plan. It was exactly the kind of plan that peaceful species developed when they had to fight wars. When the briefing ended, General Cole stood silent for a long moment. Then he pointed at the holographic map, at the red markers that represented Korath, supply lines, and forward bases. "Where are they weakest?" he asked. The Valorian commanders exchanged confused glances. The question made no sense. The entire strategy was based on defense, on holding what they had and making the enemy bleed. "General," Sithril said carefully, "our plan focuses on defensive operations. We do not have the forces to launch offensive campaigns." "I understand that is your plan," Cole replied. "I am asking where the enemy is weakest. Where are their supply depots? Their communication centers? their command posts. A young Valorian officer pulled up the relevant data on the display. 3 Korath supply depots were located behind enemy lines, each one feeding thousands of troops at the front. They were lightly defended because the Korath never expected anyone to attack them. The distances involved were too great. The enemy presence was too heavy. Any force that tried to reach those depots would be destroyed long before they arrived. General Cole studied the map and nodded slowly. My strike teams will need 48 hours to prepare. We will assault all 3 depots simultaneously. The room went very quiet. General, Sithril said, you cannot be serious. Those targets are deep in enemy territory. The chances of success are minimal. The chances of survival are almost zero. Cole turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her step back without meaning to. Admiral, I have read your reports. I know what the Korath have done to your people. I know what they will do if they are not stopped. You called us here because you needed someone willing to do what you cannot. This is what we do. The strike teams launched 48 hours later. 300 human soldiers in fast attack ships, racing through Korath-controlled space toward targets that every Valorian strategist had deemed impossible to reach. Sithril watched them go and felt sick. She had just sent 300 beings to their deaths. The humans had barely arrived, and she was already killing them. 18 hours passed with no word, then 24, then 30. The Valorian command staff began preparing memorial notices. Some officers quietly suggested that the humans had been captured and were being interrogated, that the Korath would soon know everything about the Alliance. At hour 36, the first reports came in. Supply Depot Kether 7 had been destroyed. The strike team had approached from an unexpected vector, using a navigation route that Valorian computers had classified as impassable. They had hit the depot hard and fast, overwhelming the guards before reinforcements could arrive. The humans had lost 40 soldiers. They had killed 400 Korath and destroyed supplies meant for an entire army. 20 minutes later, the second report arrived. Supply Depot Veth 3 was burning. Another impossible approach. Another devastating attack. 32 humans dead. 300 Korath dead. Enough ammunition and fuel destroyed to cripple the enemy advance for months. The third report came an hour after that. Supply Depot Morith 9 had fallen. The strike team had faced heavier resistance than expected. They had fought for 6 hours, room by room, through a facility that should have required 10 times their numbers to assault. 53 humans had died. The depot was gone. 200 soldiers had not returned. 100 soldiers had. Sithril stared at the reports and felt something she could not name. Horror. Certainly. 100 soldiers had died in a single night. By Valorian standards, it was a catastrophe. By Valorian standards, those missions should never have been attempted, but the humans did not seem devastated. The survivors returned to the fleet and immediately began planning their next mission. They mourned their dead with quiet ceremonies, spoke their names with love and respect, and then went right back to work. When Sithril found General Cole to offer her condolences, he simply nodded and said, "They knew the risks. They chose to go anyway. That is what soldiers do." "How can you accept such losses?" she asked. "How can you send your people to die like that?" Cole looked at her with those cold, seeing eyes. "We do not accept losses. We calculate them. Every soldier who died tonight saved 1,000 Valorian lives that would have been lost if those supplies had reached the front. That is a trade we will make every time." The Korath advance halted 2 days later. For the first time in months, the enemy was not pushing forward. They were confused. They were uncertain. They were afraid. Word spread quickly through the Confederacy's military. The humans had attacked. The humans had won. The humans would keep attacking until the enemy was destroyed. Sithril watched the celebrations and felt a chill run down her spine. She had wanted monsters to fight monsters. She had gotten exactly what she asked for. She wondered if she would ever be able to control them. Warmaster Vexol had conquered 47 worlds in his long career. He had crushed every enemy the galaxy had thrown at him. The Valorians, the Krithani, the Moloth all had fallen before his armies like grass before fire. He was the greatest military mind the Korath Dominion had ever produced. For the first time in his life, he was afraid. He stood in his command chamber aboard the flagship Endless Fury and studied the latest intelligence reports. His psionic commanders had been trying for weeks to read the minds of the human soldiers. to anticipate their tactics the way they anticipated everyone else. They had failed. Every single time, they had failed. Human minds were chaos. Where Valorian thoughts moved in, ordered patterns that could be predicted and exploited, human thoughts crashed against each other like waves in a storm. Rage and love and fear and hope, all tangled together in ways that made no sense. The psionic commanders could touch those minds, but they could not understand them. Their emotions are too strong, his chief Psion had reported, her face pale with exhaustion. They feel everything at once. It is like trying to read a book while it burns. Without their psionic advantage, the Korath were learning just how dangerous humans could be. The supply depot raids had only been the beginning. Human strike teams were appearing everywhere now, hitting targets that should have been safe, destroying infrastructure that had been considered untouchable. They used tactics that no rational species would consider. They attacked through asteroid fields and radiation zones. They launched assaults during ion storms when sensors were useless. They seemed to delight in doing the impossible, and they did not fight the way the Valorians fought. The Valorians valued every life. They retreated when the odds turned against them. They surrendered when defeat became certain. They were civilized. They were reasonable. Humans were neither. Vex-Ul reviewed the footage from the Battle of Kethrak Station. A human assault force had attacked a Korath garrison 3 times their size. They had been ambushed, surrounded, cut off from retreat. Any Valorian force would have surrendered at that point. The humans had not surrendered. They had fought for 6 hours. When their ammunition ran out, they fought with knives. When their knives broke, they fought with their hands. When they could no longer stand, they crawled toward the enemy and kept fighting until they died. The Korath had won that battle. They had killed every human who participated, but they had also lost 400 warriors to a force of 50. The mathematics made no sense. Humans should value their own lives. Every species valued their own lives. Self-preservation was the most basic instinct in the universe. Humans seemed to have abandoned that instinct somewhere in their violent history. Vex-Ul watched another piece of footage. A human soldier named Rodriguez. The humans all had strange, complicated names, had been wounded during a retreat. His leg was destroyed. He could not walk. His squad was ordered to leave him behind. They refused. 4 soldiers had turned back into enemy fire to recover 1 wounded man. 2 of them died. The other 2 carried Rodriguez to safety on their backs while Korath weapons fire burned the air around them. It was tactically absurd. 2 lives lost to save 1 broken soldier who might never fight again. And yet somehow it made the humans more dangerous, not less, because every human soldier knew that their brothers and sisters would come for them. They knew they would not be abandoned. They fought harder because of that knowledge. They took risks they should not have taken because they trusted their comrades to save them if things went wrong. The Korath had no such trust. The Korath sacrificed the weak without hesitation. It was the efficient way, the logical way. Looking at the casualty reports, Vex-Ul was no longer certain it was the winning way. Far from the War Master's command chamber, Admiral Sithril was having her own education in human nature. She had been observing the human forces for 3 months now, trying to understand how they thought, how they fought, how they endured. The contradictions confused her. The humans who laughed and joked between missions were the same humans who killed without hesitation when battle came. The humans who wept at memorial services were the same humans who volunteered for suicide missions the next morning. She found Sergeant James Chen sitting alone after one such memorial. The service had been for his squad 8 soldiers killed in an assault that had destroyed a Korath communication hub. Chen was the only survivor. Sithril sat beside him and said nothing for a long time. She had learned that humans sometimes preferred silence to words. "How do you bear it?" she finally asked. "How do you watch your friends die? And then keep fighting?" Chen stared at the empty space before him. His eyes were red. His face was tired, but his voice was steady. "We have been doing this to each other for 10,000 years, he said. "War is in our blood. Our ancestors survived because they could kill better than the things that wanted to kill them. Every human alive today is the descendant of warriors who won more fights than they lost." He turned to look at her, and Sithril saw something ancient in his gaze. "You look at us and see monsters. Maybe we are. But we are monsters who love each other. We are monsters who die for each other. We are the survivors of every war our species ever fought, and we are still here because we never gave up." His unit deployed an hour later. They were assaulting a Korath stronghold that every Valorian analyst had declared impenetrable. The fortress sat on a mountain peak with clear lines of fire in every direction. It had walls 3 meters thick and enough firepower to destroy an army. The humans took it in 9 hours. They came at night, climbing the mountain through paths that should have been impassable. They used explosives to breach the walls and poured through the gaps before the defenders could react. They fought through corridors and chambers, room by room, never stopping, never retreating. When the sun rose, the Korath banner was burning and the human flag flew above the ruins. 60% of the assault force was dead. The survivors called it a great victory. Sithrel watched the after-action reports and finally began to understand. Humans did not fight despite their mortality. They fought because of it. Every battle could be their last. Every moment was precious. So they burned bright and hot and refused to waste a single second on fear. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was the most human thing she had ever seen. 6 months had passed since the humans arrived, and the galaxy had changed. The Korath Dominion was retreating. For the first time in 3 centuries, they were losing ground instead of gaining it. System after system was being liberated. Worlds that had been under Korath occupation for generations were seeing their first sunrises as free planets. The humans had taught the Valorians a new way of fighting. Not the brutal, all-or-nothing approach that humans used, but something between their old defensive tactics and the aggressive human style. Valorian commanders were learning to take calculated risks, to strike at weakness instead of always defending strength. It was working. The Alliance was winning. Then War Master Vexol made his move. The message arrived at Valorian High Command in the middle of the night. Every screen on every ship displayed the same image. Vexol's scarred face, his eyes burning with cold fury, his voice steady with absolute certainty. "We have taken Theris Prime," he said. 3 billion of your people are now our hostages. Our fleet surrounds the planet. Our weapons are aimed at every city, every town, every home. If you want them to live, you will do exactly as I say." Admiral Sithrel felt her blood freeze. Theris Prime was the spiritual heart of the Valorian people. Their oldest temples stood on that world. Their most sacred texts were kept there. More importantly, 3 billion innocent civilians lived there. Families, children, the elderly. The War Master's demands were simple. Surrender. All human forces would withdraw from Valorian space immediately. The Alliance would be dissolved. The Confederacy would submit to Korath rule. If these demands were not met within 7 days, Theris Prime would burn. Every city would be reduced to ash. Every living thing would die. "The humans will come," Vexol continued, a smile crossing his scarred face. "They always attack. It is their nature. They will try to save your precious world. And when they come, we will destroy them. We have gathered every ship, every soldier, every weapon we have left. This is our final battle. We will win it, or we will take you all with us into the dark." The message ended. The silence that followed was deafening. General Cole arrived at Valorian High Command within the hour. He had already seen the message. He had already begun analyzing the situation. The holographic display in the war room showed the tactical nightmare they faced. The Korath had positioned their entire remaining fleet in orbit around Theris Prime. Hundreds of warships, each one carrying enough firepower to glass a continent. The planet's surface was occupied by 300,000 Korath soldiers, dug into every city, every strategic position. A direct assault on the fleet would result in the loss of half the human ships and still fail to break through in time. The Korath would see them coming and begin the bombardment before the first shots were fired. A siege was equally impossible. It would take months to starve the Korath fleet into submission, and during that time, 3 billion civilians would die of hunger and disease. The Korath had no intention of feeding the population they were holding hostage. The Valorian commanders saw no way out. Surrender was unthinkable, but so was watching their sacred world burn. General Cole studied the display in silence. His face showed nothing, no fear, no anger, no despair. He simply looked at the problem the way a craftsman looks at a broken tool, searching for the place where it could be fixed. "There is a third option," he said finally. Every eye in the room turned to him. "We do not attack the fleet. We land ground forces on the planet itself. We fight through the Korath occupation, reach the planetary bombardment control centers, and disable them from the surface. Without the ability to glass the planet, the Korath fleet loses its leverage. Then, we destroy them. Admiral Sithril stared at him. General, that would require landing an army on a planet held by 300,000 enemy soldiers. There would be no orbital support, no supply lines, no extraction if things go wrong. You would be fighting through the heart of the enemy's strength. Yes, Cole agreed. The casualties would be catastrophic. Yes, it cannot be done. Cole smiled, and there was something terrible in that smile. Something old and dark and hungry. That is exactly what the Korath are counting on, he said. They believe no one would be foolish enough to try. They believe no army could survive such a battle. They are wrong. Human armies have survived worse. We have fought through hell itself and come out the other side. This is what we were made for. The room was silent. Every Valorian officer was thinking the same thing. This man is insane. This plan is madness. There is no way it can succeed. But there was no other option. Surrender meant slavery. Siege meant death. Attack the fleet meant failure. Only the impossible remained. Sithril looked at the general and saw something she had never expected to see in a human face. Peace. He knew exactly what he was asking his soldiers to do. He knew many of them would die, and he had made peace with that knowledge because he believed in something greater than his own life or theirs. How many soldiers will you need? She asked. 40,000. Every human soldier we have. And how many do you expect to lose? Cole met her eyes without flinching. As many as it takes. The planning began immediately. Human officers worked through the night, mapping drop zones and assault routes, identifying key targets and defensive positions. Valorian resistance cells on the surface were contacted and coordinated. In 3 days, the largest human military operation in galactic history would begin. 40,000 soldiers against 300,000. The odds were impossible. But humans had never cared much about odds. The sky above Theris Prime burned with falling stars. 40,000 human soldiers dropped through the atmosphere in armored pods, streaking across the night sky like a meteor shower. The Korath defensive batteries fired without pause, filling the air with explosions and death. Pods were destroyed before they reached the ground. Soldiers died before they could draw a single breath of alien air. Sergeant Chen was among the first to land. His pod slammed into the ground at the edge of a burning city, and he was out and fighting before the dust had settled. Around him, other pods were crashing down, splitting open to release soldiers who immediately formed into squads and began moving toward their objectives. The Korath were waiting for them. Thousands of enemy soldiers poured out of fortified positions, weapons blazing, voices raised in war cries. They had been preparing for this moment. They knew the humans would come. What they did not know was how hard the humans would fight. The first 3 days were a nightmare. Human forces took 60% casualties just securing the landing zones. The Korath threw everything they had at the invaders. Wave after wave of soldiers crashing against the human lines. Any normal army would have broken. Any normal army would have surrendered, or retreated, or simply died. The humans did none of these things. They dug in. They adapted. They turned every building into a fortress, every street into a killing ground. When one position fell, they fell back to another. When ammunition ran low, they took weapons from the dead. When soldiers fell, others stepped forward to take their place. Chen lost half his squad on the second day. He lost another quarter on the third. By the fourth day, he was leading a mixed unit of survivors from 6 different squads, none of whom had expected to still be alive. Keep moving, he told them. Keep fighting. Every minute we survive is a minute closer to victory. They believed him because they had no choice. They believed him because believing was the only thing keeping them alive. On day 5, the first human units reached the outer defenses of the primary bombardment facility. It was a massive complex, bristling with weapons, protected by walls of reinforced steel and concrete. 2,000 Korath soldiers held it against human assault. The attack began at dawn and lasted until midnight. Humans died by the dozens, by the scores, by the hundreds. But they kept coming. They used explosives to breach the walls. They fought through corridors flooded with poison gas. They climbed over the bodies of their fallen comrades to reach the enemy and kill them. By midnight, the facility was in human hands. The bombardment controls were destroyed. 1 down, 2 to go. War Master Vexal watched the battle from his command ship in orbit, and felt something he had never experienced before: respect. He had thought the humans were simply animals, violent creatures who fought without thought or strategy. He had been wrong. They were something far more dangerous. They were predators who had learned to use their violence with precision and purpose. And they were winning. On day 7, the second bombardment facility fell. The assault had cost 3,000 human lives, but the facility was gone. The Korath could no longer target half the planet. Vex'al ordered his reserves forward for a final crushing blow. Every soldier he had left would converge on the remaining human forces and destroy them. Without the threat of planetary bombardment, the war was already lost, but he could still kill every human on the surface. He could still have his revenge. It was exactly what General Cole had been waiting for. The moment Vex'al's reserves moved out of position, a second human force struck. 10,000 soldiers who had been hidden in the mountains, waiting in silence for days, suddenly emerged and attacked the now undefended command center. The Battle of Central Command lasted 6 hours. The Korath fought desperately, knowing that the loss of their command structure would mean the end of organized resistance. But they had already committed their best troops to the assault on the human positions. What remained were support personnel, officers who had never seen frontline combat, soldiers too young or too old for the main fight. The humans tore through them without mercy. On day 9, Korath Central Command fell. Every communication line went dead. Every coordination system went offline. 300,000 Korath soldiers on the surface suddenly found themselves without orders, without leadership, without hope. The third bombardment facility surrendered without a fight. Its commanders knew the war was over. In orbit, the Korath fleet faced the combined Valorian human armada. Without their planet-killing leverage, they had nothing left to bargain with. General Cole offered them one chance to withdraw. They refused. The Battle of Theris Prime's orbit lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Korath fleet was debris. On day 11, War Master Vex'al walked out of his ruined command bunker with his hands raised. He was the first Korath War Master to surrender in the history of his species. He would not be the last. 3 months later, the war was over. The Korath Dominion, broken and leaderless, accepted terms that would have been unthinkable a year before. Their military was disbanded. Their empire was dissolved. The species that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries would never threaten anyone again. The Valorian Confederacy held a ceremony to honor their human allies. Millions watched as Ambassador Kethra presented General Cole with the highest medal the Confederacy could bestow. She thanked humanity for their sacrifice, their courage, their willingness to die for strangers. General Cole accepted the medal. Then he spoke. "You called us because you were desperate," he said. "You needed monsters to fight monsters. And we came, because that is what we are. But here is what you did not understand. We have been fighting to stop being monsters for our entire history. Every war we won, every enemy we defeated, we tried to be a little more merciful than the time before. We did not come here to prove how ruthless we could be. We came here to prove that our ruthlessness could protect something worth protecting." He looked out at the crowd, Valorians and humans standing together, survivors of a war that should have destroyed them all. "We are exactly what you feared. Violent, relentless, unbreakable. But we choose what we fight for. And today, we chose you." Admiral Sithril stood in the crowd and felt tears running down her face. She had been afraid of the humans. She had wondered if inviting them into the Confederacy was a mistake. Now she understood. Humans were not monsters. They were the thing that monsters feared. They were the wall between the darkness and the light. They were brutal because the universe was brutal, and someone had to stand against the night. The Confederacy would never fear humanity again. They would never entirely understand them either, but they would never forget what humans did when the loss appeared certain. They fought, they bled, they won, because that was what humans did.